Our home, planet Earth. It's the only planet we know of where life doesn't just exist, it flourishes. And it's only possible because of the perfect balance of our atmosphere. But human activities are upsetting this balance. Burning fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas for energy, cutting down trees, producing waste, and over-intensive farming all increase the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Throughout the whole of modern human history, carbon dioxide levels have never been so high. Humans are heating the planet to dangerous levels, and if we keep producing greenhouse gases at the same rate that we have, the Earth is likely to warm by between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. More hot days means heat waves that kills crops, livestock and people. Heat waves also melt land ice, increasing sea levels and releasing more methane. Warmer air holds more water, so it takes longer to rain, creating unreliable rainfall and drought. The combination of heat waves and drought leads to increased risk, severity and intensity of fires. Then when it does finally rain, there is more water to fall, resulting in floods. And it's not just our atmosphere that's warming. In the last 50 years, the ocean has absorbed a vast amount of heat and energy, bleaching coral and affecting other marine species, as well as creating more intense and longer-lasting storms and cyclones. Australia has warmed more than other parts of the world, and temperatures are only set to rise. By the middle of the century, in many places across the territory, the number of extreme heat days over 35 degrees, will at least double, and the number of days over 40 degrees will also increase considerably. For somewhere like Darwin, the predictions are striking. Without drastic reductions to greenhouse gas emissions, the annual number of days over 35 degrees will increase to more than 4 months of the year by 2030 and more than 6 months of the year by 2050. 35 degrees matters because at that temperature the body starts to struggle to cool itself, particularly in high humid conditions, meaning normal outdoor activities such as agriculture and construction work will become extremely challenging and potentially life-threatening for workers.
As it's getting hotter earlier in the day, compounded with very high humidity levels, new recruits to outdoor work, these are defence people who are council workers, they're overheating. And some people are actually having fainting or syncopal episodes, which can be quite dangerous if they hit their head or cause them to break a wrist or a hip. We're going to see things like this a lot more frequently as the territory heats up.
An increase in heat waves and extreme heat days will also jeopardise the outdoor lifestyle Territorians cherish so much, like fishing and camping trips, and the lucrative tourism industry that plays such a vital role to our economy.
I can tell it's getting hotter in the Northern Territory and in Darwin in particular. And it makes me frankly worried that one day Darwin's going to be unlivable. I worry that my children aren't going to be able to fully participate in activities and that we're going to be confined more and more to indoors.
Across the territory, the hottest days will become hotter and more frequent, and warm spells will last longer. There will be more demand on essential infrastructure supply like electricity and increased pressure, particularly on the vulnerable people in our community, those who can't afford to cool their homes or those who don't have homes.
While some of our people have gone on to be successful and buy their own houses, and that's fantastic, the majority of us are living in basically poverty. Pretty hard to do if you're on a minimum wage and you really can't afford to run an aircon or you don't have an aircon. It's that same festy weather that infects animals and makes them unhealthy is the same for us. We suffer from those heat conditions as well.
As parts of our country are increasingly impacted by rising temperatures and natural disasters, many places will become less livable and even habitable. In the Territory, many people already live at the edge of a tolerable climate. What might it mean for the population here as temperatures continue to rise?
Because what we know is that healthcare in the Northern Territory relies a lot on seasonal workers. These seasonal workers aren't coming as often and they're not staying as long. And when it comes time to them having children and trying to raise a young baby and to look after a child in this heat, and parents and grandparents aren't around and they're not coming up anymore to stay because it's too hot for them, people are leaving the Territory. They're returning south to cooler and more adapted places.
In the future, due to warming temperatures and varied rainfall patterns, drought is likely to be more severe across the Territory. Pastoral leases cover around 45% of all the land area, and that's an industry that's prone to the challenges of drought. And it's not just farmland that suffers during drought and periods of low rainfall. Parched landscapes contribute significantly to soil erosion and loss of our precious biodiversity.
I've spent the last 20-30 years, nearly all my life, sailing and fishing and also working on the northern coast of Australia. And I'm getting to the stage where I'm getting really worried. I'm seeing massive impacts from climate change, particularly in the last 10 years. It's rapidly escalating. In 2017, I was down in the Gulf of Carpentaria and I personally witnessed 1,000 kilometres of mangroves that had died. I flew over them in a plane and I was shocked at the extent of the devastation. Those mangroves have not regrown. That ecosystem has changed fundamentally now forever.
This event was unprecedented in its severity and intensity, and likely caused by a combination of unusually hot and unusually dry conditions, features of global warming that are projected to increase around the world throughout the 21st century.
I've watched coral reefs bleach between Gladstone and Queensland right the way around to Broome. Coral bleaching is not just a Great Barrier Reef phenomenon, it's happening all the way across northern Australia. You've all felt the heat, but imagine what it's like in the ocean for the fish. Our turtles are all being born female because the sand temperature is too hot and there's no males coming out of the sand. And also in the turtle nests, all the eggs in the middle of the nest are cooked, like scrambled eggs. Animals and wildlife don't lie about these things. They don't know anything about politics. They are responding to increasing temperatures.
In the NT, with higher temperatures predicted and lower rainfall, climate change will also result in harsher fire weather conditions with more extreme fire behaviour. During the Black Summer of 2020, in just one single bushfire season, 1.8 million hectares, almost 20% of all Australia's forests burnt, in fires that were unprecedented in their severity and intensity. Many of us in the NT had family and friends who were impacted by the fires. Over 3,000 homes were destroyed and 18,000 people were still displaced months later. 3 billion animals were killed or displaced, ecosystems were destroyed, and vast amounts of CO2 was emitted into the atmosphere as a result. Recent studies have shown that a summer like 2020 will be an average summer by 2040 and considered a cool summer by 2060. In the same season, Arnhem Land Ranger groups were forced to fight fires that were hotter, more intense and burned longer, and rangers are worried that wildfires up here will continue to get worse. Since the 90s, there has been greater variability in wet season rainfall recorded in the NT, with both wetter and drier years seen more recently. Due to climate change, future rainfall is likely to become more unpredictable and the intensity of heavy rainfall events will increase. In the north, cyclones are also predicted to become more intense. In other parts of Australia, we've recently witnessed the dramatic impacts of changes to rainfall as a result of climate change. At the beginning of 2022, in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland, our friends and family were impacted by the unprecedented flooding. Many people lost everything, including homes and businesses that were uninsured because of prohibitive insurance costs. Around the world, we are witnessing an increase in the incidence and severity of these kinds of disasters and the costs associated.
We're also seeing rapid sea level rise. You may have noticed back in January during a monsoonal event we had 30 to 40-year-old casuarina trees washing into the ocean at Lee Point. And this is a shocking example of the reality of today and the climate change impacts coming to the north.
So it's a very uncertain future for us and for everybody else. We're not sure how much of this coast is going to be inundated. I'm understanding there'll be some sort of saltwater intrusion coming into freshwater areas. Even this gully here, this freshwater site, this important site, the first site of shared freshwater in Darwin, could be suffering from saltwater intrusion at some point in the near future. So, you know, I am saying to people, hit the panic button. We need to start planning for our actual survival, not just the wildlife and the trees, but our survival, because we are going to see some really massive changes very soon.
By 2050, experts estimate there could be over 1 billion climate refugees around the world, fleeing their homes due to natural disasters, uninhabitable land and sea level rise. This will put additional strain on the resources of countries they are migrating to and creates potential for global instability. Experts warn that every fraction of a degree of warming puts the world at greater risk. Of even more concern is that the higher the temperatures rise, the greater the risk of accelerating the effects of positive feedback loops and triggering irreversible and abrupt changes to the climate. For example, white ice reflects sunlight, cooling the planet. As ice melts due to climate change, that cooling no longer occurs, increasing the warming and melting more ice, which creates more warming, melting more ice, and so on. Healthy forests absorb carbon dioxide from our atmosphere, helping to slow global warming. But when forests burn, they release all the carbon dioxide they've absorbed back into the atmosphere, increasing global warming, creating conditions for more fires to release more carbon dioxide, and so on. Scientists don't know for certain when these feedback loops will kick in or how they will play out. But every fraction of a degree we continue warming, the more likely this possibility becomes. Fortunately, the world is responding. In much of the world, solar and wind power are now cheaper than new coal power plants. Innovative solutions are being found to reduce or eliminate emissions from energy production and consumption, manufacturing, transport, buildings, waste, and more. Innovations in farming and changes to land use can also play a significant role. Australian researchers have found that adding small amounts of seaweed to the diet of cattle can reduce their methane emissions by up to 99%. Reducing savanna burning and land clearing that make up almost half of the territory's emissions could also have a big impact. Revegetation of cleared land draws carbon out of the atmosphere and replenishes soil. If just 28% of land currently cleared in Australia were revegetated, it would offset all emissions from our agriculture sector. In 2019, the City of Darwin declared a climate emergency. Since then, City of Darwin had developed 3 key strategies, with actions aimed to reduce emissions through all aspects of Council's operations, including waste and resource recovery processes, revegetation of Darwin, promoting and supporting energy efficiency in the community, the uptake of solar PV, and increasing active and electric transport options.
Electric bikes will declutter roads and reduce traffic congestion. They don't require a parking space. And you can travel further, you can travel much further distances in hotter, more inclement weather when you're older on an electric bicycle.
Increasingly, countries and vehicle manufacturers are phasing out petrol and diesel cars. Without a robust national electric vehicle plan, Australia risks being left behind. The Northern Territory Government has made a start with an electric vehicle strategy, and there are currently more charging stations in the NT than you might think. These examples provide just a glimpse of the many inspiring solutions available right now to address global warming. We're at a unique moment in time. Solutions are available. Change is already underway, but we're not moving fast enough. Burning coal, oil and gas for energy is the largest contributor to global warming. Governments around the world give tax breaks and subsidies to fossil fuel companies worth almost $500 billion every year. In the NT, energy production and use is a significant contributor to our domestic greenhouse gas emissions.
So right now, the Northern Territory, we are about the second highest carbon emitters per population in the world. Now, if we develop the Beetaloo Basin, we will be by far the highest carbon emitters in the world per population. If we develop the Barossa Basin, we're literally double as bad as any other country in the world. So the Barossa gas field lies about 300 k's north of Darwin, where we sit at the moment, and that gas field is incredibly dirty. It has a carbon dioxide content of about 18 to 20%. Now they have to dig it out of the ground, they have to send it into Darwin here, into the harbour, to Darwin LNG and make LNG out of that gas. And in the process of doing that, they end up becoming a carbon dioxide factory with an LNG byproduct. That's how dirty that gas field is. Now the second carbon bomb is the Beetaloo. The Beetaloo Basin is really big. It has a lot of shale gas down there, and it's also very difficult to get it out of the ground because you need to use a process called fracking, which is incredibly damaging to underground water sources because a lot of chemicals are used and the risks are extremely great, particularly in an arid environment like the Beetaloo, down on the Barkly Tableland, where groundwater is critical for life, critical for survival, not just animals but humans too. And yet here we are, we have a federal government and a territory government going full steam ahead to develop these two massive carbon polluting bombs. We couldn't do anything worse if we tried to increase carbon emissions in Australia. We are that bad at it.
What if instead of forging ahead with planned fossil fuel extraction from the Barossa and Beetaloo gas fields, the Northern Territory government invested in renewable energy instead? Renewables are increasingly the cheapest form of energy around the world, and the Northern Territory has an abundance of solar advantage.
Now, we have an incredible opportunity here to switch. We don't have to go down this path of using fossil gas as a feedstock. That is rapidly becoming old school technology, and it's not the way of the future.
What could we achieve if instead of funding new coal, oil and gas projects, that money was put towards addressing climate change? What if we made the same effort towards fighting global warming that was made towards winning World War II or putting humans on the moon? What if we made the same effort as we have towards overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic? Humans can do incredible things when we choose to. The question is, what will we choose?